Thanks, Luke. So Acts 18, is that where we're at? Let's do that. So as we've been moving through the book of Acts, we've been covering it also in our men's midweeks. So that was fantastic. We did that last week. We went over 17 again. And something cool about this portion of the book, in 17 in particular, is we start to kind of see a shift in what's being communicated. We move from a kind of like a micro lens into a macro lens of the growth of the church. We kind of started like a pinpointed spot, like the beginning where it started in Acts chapter 2, and kind of slowly that circle, that radius increases, and we're trying to where we're getting where we're at right now. We're looking at large picture stuff, and Paul's kind of moving from here to here to here, preaching, going to synagogues, and that's the kind of transition we're making, and we see happen in chapter 18. So he's actually in Corinth, and that's where we're going to pick up, as Paul getting into Corinth, and we know that he wrote the letters 1st and 2nd Corinthians to the church in Corinth. So that's kind of interesting to note as we read through this passage. Those are the people he's speaking to. Just a little bit of info there. Let me move this up. Is that stuck there? Can we move that up? Where's Ben? Is that possible? I know I'm short, but come on. It's all right. Ben, everybody. Ben swinging. That's great. Yeah, that's good. What I need is a larger print Bible. I'm getting older. It's happening. I know, right? Thank you. Soon, though. Soon. The gray hairs, I'm seeing them. I'm old. Did you hear the one thing that was different from everybody else's? Kelly was like, you need to get married on the day that Stacy's not here. So I don't know what. Anyway. All right. Acts chapter 18. What? Whatever. God's word. 18, verse 1. Let's do this. We got a little bit of work to do today. Two things I want to pull out. Divine encouragement from God. As you get to this point in the Bible, Paul's been from place to place. You start seeing a trend in what's happening. He preaches, people believe, and then people get really mad at him. All right, that's like the pattern we start to see happen that will continue. So I want to look at what I'm going to call divine encouragement. Right? That's going to be one thing. And then the second thing we're going to look at is sharing tables. All right? That's going to be the second thing. But let's go ahead and get into this. I'm not going to read every verse here, but just kind of move through at a pace that I think we need to. Chapter 18, verse 1. After this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. There he met a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had ordered all the Jews to leave Rome. Paul went to see them, and because he was a tent maker, as they were, he stayed and worked with them. Every Sabbath, he reasoned in the synagogue, trying to persuade Jews and Greeks. All right, so we're going to stop there and look at that. So Paul gets into Corinth, and he actually, where we just picked up from, was him preaching in Athens in the Areopagus, which means hill of Ares, right? A place where just the pagans would come and talk about ideas and philosophies. And he was actually speaking to the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers in such a way, and we mentioned this briefly in midweek, won't spend long here, but in such a way, he was speaking about Jesus in such a way that connected with these Epicurean and Stoic philosophers. Here's why that's interesting, because their philosophy, while very rooted in kind of the pleasure of the material, in the sustainability of one's personal character, like there was something, even though like Paul was a Pharisee, right, and he grew up like on the opposite ends of the spectrum from these guys as far as religion goes, but he was preaching in such a way that these guys that were on another side of the battle said, we need more of that. We got to hear you talk a little bit more about that. You got come to these people, come speak to this, right? And you know what's interesting here, and I'm just going to say this, and we'll move. I promise you, we'll be in chapter 18. I'm going to say this. What was interesting here, right, is that the Bible notes that these people's philosophy had devolved into nothing but talking about ideas. And so something I got to say that I said to the men Wednesday, and I got to say to us, is Christianity can't ever for us devolve into just talking about ideas, right? It must be lived out to be Christianity. All right? So Paul kind of steps in there with these babblers as he was being called. And as the Bible says, they were just babbling. And he steps in there into a place that was not his comfort zone. He was, in fact, alone at this point, waiting for other disciples to join him in Athens. He kind of steps into that arena and goes for it. So we must never, and we're going to see this tie into our sermon today, we must never be afraid to go into places that we might feel are uncomfortable for us, for Jesus. That can't happen. All right, I can't just be talking about an idea. We have to be willing to go to these places. Does that make sense? So here's what happens in chapter 18. He shows up into Corinth and he meets a couple, right, who had just recently arrived there because the Roman emperor at the time, Claudius, had kind of pushed the Jews, that's what it says here, the Jews out of Rome. And so what we know is at this point, because of language given to us and kind of secular documents and reports of this time, the Romans didn't really consider Christianity not Jewish yet. So, right, so when you hear Jewish, they're also talking about the Christians. In fact, we have this that was written about the Roman Emperor Claudius at the time. This is by a dude named Suetonius. Is that right? Any Greek speakers in here? Ben says yes. Thank you, Ben. Don't play bananagrams with him. You'll lose. All right, it says this about Claudius, who we knew reigned from AD 41 to AD 54. So that's kind of the time period. We're looking at about 10 to 20 years after Jesus died. That's where we're at in our timeline with the church, which is interesting to see how much happened in such a little time. But anyway, this is what was said about Claudius. Since the Jews constantly, at least here Jews, here Christian, since the Jews constantly made disturbances at the instigation of Christus, Jesus, all right, he, the Emperor Claudius, expelled them from Rome. And we have a couple other historians that kind of corroborate the story plus the biblical text itself, that because of what Christus had instigated in these Jews, right, he pushed them out. And so actually twice before, Jews had been pushed out of Rome. Once before Jesus, then again around 19 AD. This wasn't even new for the Roman emperor to deal with it. It's like, all right, Jews rising up again. Got to push them on out, right? And we see that he does this with them. But because of that, it's interesting, because of that, Paul met Priscilla and Aquila in this, oh wait, sorry, did I say that right?
Yeah.
Priscilla and Aquila in this town of Corinth. So as the world continually forces back Christians and that effort in Jews, God continually has a plan for that. Right? And we saw when Stephen was killed, God had a plan for that, right? So something that we see happening as a pattern here, and when I'm talking about divine encouragement, because where victory is had, persecution will be had. And we as a church need to know how to deal with persecution on a physical and on a mental level, right? Are you with me? We need to understand that this has been an active part of Christianity's history, right? And it wasn't until recently, kind of in this last century, that Christians, and I mean genuinely trying to preach the word, experience some kind of favor, right? So as we leave that and we experience kind of the pushback on the world again, just know this is where we have been for centuries, and it's okay because God knows what he's doing. Amen. All right? Is that right? Okay. So we see that Claudius pushed them out. He meets Priscilla and Aquila. And here's what I love. In verse 3, and because he was a tent maker as they were, he stayed and worked with them every Sabbath. He reasoned in the synagogue, trying to persuade Jews and Greeks. So just for where we're at, here's what I want to pull out of this verse for our church, that Paul was a tent maker by trade. Right? And that's what he did to make money, to support himself, and he went and he found old Aquila here, who was also a tent maker. So what did Paul do? He was like, hey, let's do this. Let's make some tents. Let's make some money to support ourselves, and then once a week, right? Interesting that once a week went to the Sabbath to reason with the Jews. All right, so here's what I like about this. Paul, not knowing these guys, comes in, meets them, and sets up shop with these guys. He just sets up shop. He's like, okay, let's do this. I guess we're going to work together now. Right? Like that level of connection, here's the term we've heard before that I think we connect with, is Paul set up shop doing life with Priscilla and Aquila. Right? Like that he was like, okay, we're just going to do this, and on the weekend we're going to go preach the word. But during that week, where was he? Working with Aquila. Like we have to be willing to have these kind of relationships with each other. They're like so bonded and connected that like throughout the week, that's just who we're with. Our people that on the weekend we're going to go preaching to. The preaching isn't relegated to a weekend. But that's just the pattern we see Paul here do for a while. We're not really sure how long he did that for. Because later, some disciples would come and he would switch over to just full-time preaching. But I like that Paul used his gift, right, his workmanship, to create a place for him with these disciples. This is something that's going to be so huge, and to me, like tied into what we're talking about the sermon today, is that we have to be so connected that we are with disciples who are making disciples who are themselves going to be disciple makers, right? And we're going to see Priscilla and Aquila do just that in the next part of the sermon. But here's what happens. Let's read verse 5. When Silas and Timothy came from Macedonia, Paul devoted himself exclusively to preaching, testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Christ. But when the Jews opposed Paul and became abusive, he shook out his clothes in protest and said to them, "Your blood be on your own hands. I am clear of my responsibility. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles." All right, so here's what I like here. I was trying to find a better word than tantrum, but Paul kind of has a little bit of a something meltdown, confrontation, a what? A fit. Okay, he's experiencing discouragement and frustration with the way people are receiving what he's teaching. All right, so he's like, "God, no more." All right, just to the Gentiles, which is interesting because we see him preach to Jews later. But regardless of that, we see that Paul was experiencing a block. Right, and then this is that pattern I was talking about. He would preach, some would listen, some would not. All right, so Paul's experiencing this, and this is huge, and I think it's kind of lining up with where we're at as the church develops, persecution will develop, and we see that God actually has something to say to Paul for that. In verse 9, it says, "One night the Lord spoke to Paul in a vision, 'Do not be afraid. Keep on speaking. Do not be silent. For I am with you, and no one is going to attack you and harm you, because I have many people in this city.'" So Paul stayed for 1.5 years teaching them the Word of God. All right? So when Paul's in this kind of experiencing this discouragement, likely, like, okay, they aren't getting it, they aren't hearing it, I'm going to speak to other people. I get that. Go speak to people who want the message. That's great. Do that. But in this time, and this is what I want us to hear, that as we spread, reach out, preach, people come to have a relationship with Jesus that other people will not. And you cannot let that discouragement of the not override your encouragement of those who do.
Amen.
All right? So we have to be willing to take this. This is what I'm calling divine encouragement. When God says, "I have people in this city. You don't know them yet, but they're there." So hear him say that to us in our life and in our city. God has people in this city.
Yes.
Right? And persecution and people who back up against you, right, does not change that God has people in this city. Yeah. And we have to be so faithful in believing and in thinking that. And I don't know where your all's expectations are at as far as how numerical growth should look, but I'll just go ahead and say, don't have expectations for how numerical growth should look.
Right.
You can have expectations of what you do, because you can do that, of how many seeds you plant and water, but you can't have reasonable expectations that you see what God makes grow, as the scriptures say. Right? All the more, and I think this should empower us to be secure that literally all I have to do is go preach the word.
Amen.
And live the word. I don't have to be bonded by the growth that happens there unless you know there's more you can be doing to plant water. That's where it gets different. But so you can have expectations there, but we have to be willing to see that God makes it grow, and he has people in this city, and we need to go plant and water seeds.
Come on, Daniel.
Right? This divine encouragement comes to Paul, and I hope comes to us in our lives and where we're at. I can be entangled by these things, but I think God's trying to lift that burden and actually provide some security. I think that's awesome that all I have to do is put it out there. I think that's awesome that God does the rest to make it grow. Yes, here and I. Let's just find security in that. We go plant and water. Right now, if there's an issue in planting and watering in your life, see that, work on that. But we have a security that that's what we do, and God makes it grow. So this is what I'm talking about by divine encouragement, because I think when we have these episodes of like, nobody wants this, God, I'm done preaching to them, right? When we have these episodes, I think God would step in and say, look, there's people in this city. I have them, they're here, right? Don't be afraid, I am with you. And I love how much that echoes what Jesus said to his disciples when he ascended in Matthew 28:18. Right? He's like, hey, go baptize, go preach, go teach, and I'm going to be with you. And he tries to reaffirm that here for us as the church gets going. So this divine encouragement. We can go be a disciple, make disciples who make disciples. As Jackson likes to tell me, this is not a suggestion, right? This is what we do, right? This is who we are. And we're going to be disciples that believe in God, a natural overflow of that is going to be making disciples. And not only that, but these disciples that make disciples, like this is the overflow of that.
Amen.
Right? And we can't be afraid by the things that come up and attack us because it happens so many times in the book of Acts. Just read the book in persecution. It happens where the disciples are active, right?
Yep.
So this divine encouragement. And I think something we need to hear, and this is moving on to the second part here, I think something that we need to hear is that this can look differently than we think. And something we were talking a little bit with the men about is that we need to be willing to be friends with, like we need to be experts at building friendships.
Come on, dude.
What do we see happen often in the Bible? People going out preaching the word, like just in public, right? Like Jesus sending the 2x2s out to go talk to people. But you know what we see happen just as much? People sitting down and sharing a table with somebody, right? To build these connections and reach out and evangelize. And something we can't forget, that evangelism, the word evangelism means the good news. All right, so we can't forget that it doesn't mean, we have to remember that the root of evangelism is sharing Jesus with people. That looks many different ways. All right, so we're going to see something cool happen here at the back end of this. And so we'll start in verse 24. It says, meanwhile, a Jew named Apollos, a native of Alexandria, came to Ephesus. He was a learned man with a thorough knowledge of the Scriptures. He had been instructed in the way of the Lord, and he spoke with great fervor and taught about Jesus accurately, though he knew only the baptism of John. He began to speak boldly in the synagogue. When Priscilla and Aquila heard him, they invited him to their home and explained to him the way of God more adequately. All right, so at this point in the chapter, Paul's left. Paul moved on, he's going around, he's moving, and that's what we're going to see Paul do for the rest of the book. Going around, moving. But something interesting here is that when Paul left, there was a competent couple that was there to lead, convert, securely, competently, boldly. All right, but now we see Paul interact and have encounters with people throughout Acts, and it's not the quite, hey, come to my house and sit down, pal. It's like, what are you doing? Right? It's the more kind of just in there and in the face confrontational, and that's great because that worked a lot. But we see Priscilla and Aquila say, hey, why don't you just come to our home? Right? Come to our home. Sit down, let's talk. Right? I think this idea that reaching out, sharing Jesus with people looks differently, and some of us excel in different ways in doing that. All that matters is that we do it, right? And so Priscilla and Aquila may not be the Paul, but I like that there were these competent people that even though Paul, right, was gone, they were bold enough to step up to a guy who was really smart, right? I can be really afraid of that. I'm not a smart guy, all right? I got my degree in art, all right? I had 3.2 in college. I was trying hard, all right? I'm just not, intelligence is not my strength. That's why Ben always beats me in bananagrams. I get 3-letter words, sometimes 4, right? And that's my max. But it's just like that's like I can be afraid of that. He says we have to be willing to go into these places. And I like how Priscilla and Aquila, though not having the boldness of Paul, had the boldness of Priscilla and Aquila.
That's right.
To step in and say, "Hey, come to our house." Right? Just come sit down. We have to be okay with building these friendships with people that are not like us. In fact, that can be one of the biggest shots to the foot for Christianity. It's creating a Christian bubble in our lives. Right? To think, okay, we're Christian. This is our place. This is who we are. That is so damaging for so many different reasons, because then you start comparing yourselves to these people. You create the us and them mentality. And that's just not how it should be. We have to be experts at building friendships with anybody and everybody. Now, there's always a filter of wisdom for that, of bad company corrupting good character, of going to a place where you'll be influenced and not the influencer. There is that filter of wisdom with that. But that we don't isolate ourselves. Right? Now, our best friends should be disciples and Christians, because that's the walk of life we're on. But I think let me just say this, all right? And I'm not going to hide anything, right? If you're new, I'm not just going to lay it on the table. My deepest, greatest desire for you today is that you can hear something from the Word that inspires you and pulls you closer to a relationship with God in such an irresistible way that you can't help but come back. And that you become a disciple of Jesus, right? I just lay that out there. I'm not trying to hide that, all right? I don't care who you are, your background. That's kind of what I want for you. So I hope you get that, right? But we need to be willing to reach out and grab on to anybody, because I was an atheist before this, and it's easy for me to think, okay, that's an atheist, he's not going to be open, right? But it's the people that were building and loving up on me had that mentality, I would not be here.
That's right. Come on.
Think about it, the guy's an atheist, I'm not going to invite him out to church, I'm not going to try to study the Bible with him, that never happened. If anything, it was a relentless pursuit of my friendship. That's who we need to be. And now here's something key. And it's why I brought up the numerical thing earlier. This relentless pursuit of friendships cannot be to satisfy the security in numbers of what we produce. Our relentless pursuit of friendships come from a heart that I'm so compelled by what God's done for me and the love that I have. I just want to show that, give that. People, you got to have it. You got to have what I'm experiencing here, right? Yeah. And then we just walk in this kind of compelling love with no fear of how it's producing, but we just walk in this compelling love that I relentlessly give of myself because of what's been given to me in such a pure, motivated way that we can't help but just do it.
Yep.
Come on. Right? So, have to be willing to go into these places with people and share tables with anybody. Let's go to Mark chapter 14. We just gotta read some Jesus. All right.
Come on, Daniel.
On repeat in the Gospels, we see Jesus sit down and share tables with people. This is one of my favorite. I'm going to tell you why. Mark chapter 14. And we see this same account happen in 3 of the Gospels, but in Mark and Matthew, it shows us something particularly interesting. So in Mark chapter 14, let's just do verse 1. Let's do that. Now the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread were only 2 days away, and the chief priests and the teachers of the law were looking for some sly way. I like that you sly. I like that word. They were looking for some sly way to arrest Jesus and kill him. But not during the feast, they said, or the people might riot. What an impact Jesus had. The people would riot. They were afraid of that happening. While he was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of a man known as Simon the leper. All right, now we focus a lot on the part that comes after this, rightfully so. A woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. And now this pouring perfume, very common at a banquet to anoint a guest of honor. All right, and we could maybe touch on that in a minute, but what I really want to do here is say that he was reclining at the table of a man known as Simon the leper. All All right? Like let's not, like it's easy to glance over these little lines, but sometimes in these little lines are monumental implications and messages. Now lepers would have been like at the absolute bottom of this social class society, right? And people would not want to go near. They would have their own colonies and wear bells around them, so when they came, you knew there was a leper coming, so you could get out of the way, right? And we see that Jesus, not just this time, but would just go up to a leper, would touch him and heal him. Now here's what we don't know. I think what is probably the case here is that Jesus ran into this person before, healed him, but he had such a stigma, because that's what leprosy was. He had such a stigma around him. He was known as Simon the leper. Now, whether he healed him before or during this dinner, we don't know. But we know Jesus walked into his house, and he sat down with him, and he shared a table with him. That the lowest of the low, he would say, I want to eat with you. I want to sit with you. I want to spend time with you. We saw him do this with a tax collector. We saw him do this with Pharisees. So we see no matter what class they were in, Jesus said, I need to sit with you and know you and talk with you and share life with you. And this is what like dinner was, right? We lost this in our society in a lot of ways. I think maybe coming back a little bit, but like dinner and sharing a meal with somebody is this very intimate thing, and even in some places in the world still today is like hours, right? Like if you go over to eat with somebody, it's like the day. All right, just block that day out because you're eating with this couple, all right? You just put everything else aside because you're going to get there and you're going to eat and you're going to talk and you're going to laugh and you're going to connect on this level that I think we only really can when we're sharing a meal with somebody. We saw Jesus loved sharing meals with people, right? When he came back and was talking with Peter, what did he have ready for him? When Peter was swimming to him from the boat, he had food, all right? He had bread and fish, and so I just started the ketogenic diet. Is anybody aware of that? Me and Ben are doing it, and Sarah says no. Right? I can't tell you how many people I've shared this with, and like you're an idiot, right? And so one person specifically said, "Hey, you know what Jesus ate a lot of? Bread, right? A lot of bread." I was like, okay, don't do this, right? Emily, she's teaching the kids, but she's like that consistent voice on my shoulder. Hey, man, it's just a donut. Let's go eat some carbs. Carbs are great. I like to polish my day off of carbs with like some Taco Bell and some Cheetos. That's after breakfast, like 3 bagels. Hey, come on, right? We were having a party last night. There's a lot of carbs there, and I go with Britta to the store to get something. And after we get that something, we got a bag of chocolate chip cookies. And so Britta's like in the car, like I think you threw down 3 of those right before we got to the. Oh, sorry, was that bad? Actually, I meant to do that. I was doing 3 of them before we got there. I'm just like driving, and then we get there, and then the bag. No, it's later at night. How did I get to this point? Why are we talking about this? I gotta commit. Let me finish this. I gotta finish this story. So it's later at the party. We're all hanging out, chilling. And Emily said, hey, now I'm hungry. We're going for around 3 on this dinner. All right? And she goes in. She doesn't make it into the kitchen at all. She kind of reaches through. Can we just applaud Sarah for teaching in a way that just inspires and impacts women? So I'll take pointers from you after this is done, how to preach this scripture. Verse 15, when one of those at the table with him heard this, wait a minute, Jesus was sitting at a table again. Trends. At the table with him heard this, he said to Jesus, blessed is the man who will eat at the feast in the kingdom of God. All right, okay, so multiple times in the Gospels, Jesus is trying to, that's what the gospel meant then, was preaching the good news of the coming of the kingdom. So as Jesus was sitting here waiting, he would preach the gospel of the coming of the kingdom of God. Oftentimes, like he would give us an imagery for it because we can't quite get it yet. So he would always say it's like this, it's like something, because we can never really, I think I've said this before, I'm just going to go ahead and do it again. It's like a baby in the womb trying to comprehend what the world outside of it is like. Like if you had to try to explain, and I always do this one, but a piece of pizza, right, to that baby in the womb, like what frame of reference would that baby in the womb have to get that? Like just primal things, like it's like when the food goes into your, and like, okay, imagine they can understand you in language, whatever. It's an illustration. All illustrations break down at some level. But it's like trying to, for that baby to understand what a piece of pizza is like, and the best you would have, it's like this, baby. It's like this. Like you couldn't be able to tell them a shape of it. It's like a triangle. They don't know what a triangle is. Or it's like trying to tell them, it's like when your mother feeds you and you feel sustained and nourished. Like that's what they would understand. So as Christ communicates the kingdom to us, and he says it's like this. And he just told us it's like a banquet. Right? It's like a banquet. And so we're going to see just how, but I just want to point that out, that Christ is using a gathering of people and of food and of company to explain what heaven's going to be like. All right, let's move on. Verse 16. Jesus replied, "A certain man was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to tell those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is now ready.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said, 'I have just bought a field and I must go and see it. Please excuse me.' Another said, 'I have just bought 5 yoke of oxen and I'm on my way to try them out,' whatever that means. Please excuse me. Still another said, 'I just got married, so I can't come. I'm not married yet. I don't know what's going on there.' Anyway, you think about it. Verse 21. The servant came back and reported this to his master. Then the owner of the house became angry and ordered his servant to go quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, the lame. 'Sir,' the servant said, what you have ordered has been done, but there is still room.' Then the master told his servant, 'Go out to the roads and the country lanes and make them come in, so that my house will be full. I tell you, not one of those men who are invited will get a taste of my banquet.'" And now I believe Sarah explained greatly what a slap in the face, a rejection to the king would have been to a banquet, right? I was just talking with Britta, about it, like how everything that they would have had would have been given to them by the king in the society, and to say that I don't need your respect, or like what I have is mine, would be just like a total slap in the face what the king has done and provided to them, right? So Jesus is giving us this illustration for how God reaches out to us and how we say, "No, I don't want what you have. I don't want. I've got it. I'm good." And God's like, literally everything you have in your life is good, I've given to you. But it's like such a slap in the face that would be. But what I love here, and kind of where I'm going to zone in on for our point in our sermon, right, is that though people rejected him, he said, "Quickly go and get more people." He wouldn't say, "Sermon, we'll throw another one, we'll figure it out." Quickly go and get people. The urgent, the action, the energy, but quickly go and get people. And so the servant did just that, and there was still room at the table. He's like, "I can't have that. We need this to be full. Keep going until it's full." Like here's what we need to get at the table Christ wants to sit at us with and wants us to sit at others with. Like there is room at this table. Like it doesn't matter. Like I think some of us don't think, okay, where I'm at in my life, I can't experience this table. I'm not good enough for this table. You don't know what I've done, or maybe like there's room at the table of Christ that we all have an access and invitation to, regardless of background. And as servants, we are charged quickly to go and get people to sit at this table. This is not a suggestion, right, Jackson? It's not a suggestion. That our lives be so filled with the love for the King and what He's given us that we go and bring other people into that love. And we're willing to share a table with anybody. Filter of wisdom, but share a table and a life and words and love with anyone. This is it. That's what I got. Sometimes you guys try to clap, it's like 2 of you, and nobody really commits. So if you're going in, you got to go in. but really this is the Word of God. So I think if that applause could just go to the Word and God, that would be, thank you. But so as we're closing out, we're returning to communion here. This is what I want us to be thinking about. It's the divine encouragement that comes from Christ daily in the image of the cross. That daily we have the ability to crucify ourselves. That daily we have an ability to pull people into this love and relationship. Right? But just hear this. I don't know where a lot of you are at. I know most of you, I don't know where all of you are at, but when I think just hear this resounding encouragement, there's room at the table for you to sit down, share a meal with God, and we should have rooms in our heart to sit down with anybody. Let's be experts at building friendships. Why? Out of the motivation of love. All right, let's be experts at loving God. Amen. Let's bow our heads and pray for communion. God, we thank you for what you've given us. I don't know that can be overstated or over-preached or over-talked about, is the room that's left at the table. For those of us who have decided to come and sit down, that we have the charge to quickly go and tell others there's room for you. For those who haven't, to realize there's room for me. No matter what that history, background, life looks like, there's room at the table. Let's be experts at this, Father. We love you. Please help us be compelled. Let us love. Let's make a difference. Let's be those people, right? That Clyde's just like, I can't stand these guys, not again. Let's be those people, right? In a weird way, but just so loving, so relentlessly loving. So relentlessly about relationships with each other that people notice it. We're that salt to the world. That light from a lamp that we can't put under a bowl, but has to be vibrant and visible for all to see. God, I love you. Thank you.